Today I'm going to be showing you how to make sourdough yeast. I'm harvesting yeast out of the air. So down here I actually have 100 grams of filtered water, room temperature, and then I've also have all-purpose unbleached flour already weighed out at 125 grams. So 125 grams of warm water, 125 grams of flour. I'm going to go ahead and just add this into my water, and then using a very sophisticated mixing device, my clean hand, I'm just going to go ahead and mix this together with my hand. And then this is going to sit underneath a tea towel. Okay, we're halfway through day 2 on my yeast. You can tell it's not ready to start being fed yet, but you can tell right there, that's a bubble. See that there? And then there's more over here. And there's a sweet smell to it. Depending on what it looks like tomorrow, we might be able to start feeding it tomorrow instead of Friday. But we're looking for sweet smell and a lot of this bubbling, meaning the yeast is taking form. So there we are, day number 2 on our yeast. We are at 2.5 days on the yeast. We can see that we have nice yeast forming. So we're gonna feed this, and to feed it we need to do some math. So we started with 125 grams of water, 125 grams of flour. So 80% of it we're gonna discard, and 20% of it we're gonna keep. So 250 times 0.2 equals 50 grams. So I need 50 grams of the actual yeast. So I'm just gonna scoop off this top part, and see that bubbles is good signs of yeast right there. So I need 50 grams of this. And then 250 times 0.8 is 200. So 200 divided by 2 is 100 grams each. So I need 100 grams more of water and 100 grams more of flour. And that will give us back to our 100%. So I need 50 grams of my yeast, or my starter. Oh man, you can smell this Arizona Bacterius. All right, there's 52 grams. I already had 100 grams of water. There's 52 grams of my yeast. I'm now gonna add 100 more grams of flour. So I should have 250. And I'm gonna do this feeding every day now to get my yeast going, to keep it alive. This actually has become a pet. It's now living. I need to feed it daily, and this is how I feed it. I discard 80%, keep 20, and then add my flour and my yeast. I'm just gonna use the handle of my spoon to stir this, just because it's easy to get in here. It's easy to get stirred, get the sides all cleaned up, and just keep my yeast going, and this is gonna feed it. I'm gonna mark this jar. I'm gonna put this down as my yeast. A lot of people like to name this since it is a pet, it's a living thing. I haven't come up with a name yet, but I'm also gonna put the tape right here where my yeast is, because I wanna watch my yeast rise and fall, and you should see it expand, double in size, and then shrink, and then double in size, and then shrink. And that's what we're gonna do on our daily feeding. Keep 80, keep 20. Now this discard, I can actually use this to cook. Now, I've been talking with a lot of chefs on the best way to use discard. Some say you just need to know what you're doing with to do it by yourself. Others say just stick to recipes that call for sourdough starters, but you want to keep this discard. I'm going to put it in a different jar. I'm going to label it discard and keep it in my fridge, but I'm going to use this discard to make cinnamon rolls here shortly, but I need a full cup of my discard. So I don't think I have a full cup. So maybe tomorrow after I feed my yeast again, I will have a full cup. Screw on the lid. Don't put it on very tightly. We want air to still be able to get in there, but there is my yeast on its first day of feeding. We'll see you back. It is said that you can take 1 cup of discard for 1 package of yeast, and a packet of yeast is approximately 2¼ teaspoons of yeast, and so 1 cup of discard is equal to that. In all reality, you have to know the chemistry of dough and baking and what you're doing, so that you can monitor it and watch your dough properly and make sure it has the right consistency. So you just got to pay attention to it. This is the discard from the day before, and so we'll just need a little bit of that to make up our cup here. The interesting thing about sourdough starter kits or doughs is this is how they made bread in the back day. Like, so everyone that made bread and dough, this is all they did. And generally they just took a lump of their dough that they made left over from the night before, and they made their dough. So if you know what you're doing with bread, this shouldn't be too hard. I'm gonna go with 1 cup of discard to make up for a packet of yeast, which is 2¼ and that's just gonna go into 1 cup of warm water in a standalone mixer. And we'll let that get going. And the discard from yesterday was a little cold, so I'm gonna let this sit here and get warmed up because I have warm water in this bowl. Get that working. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and add a 1/4 cup of sugar into the water and just kind of give that a mix. First, in the standing mixer, I'm actually going to use a wire whisk, and I'm actually going to beat this. And I'm only going to beat half of the flour. So I'm only going to go with 1.5 cups of flour, and it's going to call for 3 to 3¼ cup of flour. And the reason that is you got to watch your moisture content in your area. If you're high humidity, you'll need more flour. If you're low humidity, you'll need less. So we always start with 1.5 cups first. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and whip this together until it's frothy. Okay, now that that's come together and is well mixed with the whisk, I'm just gonna go ahead and take the whisk out. Now, switching over to the dough hook, I'm gonna go ahead and knead this, and I'm gonna slowly add the flour to the consistency that we want. Now, this is not gonna be a sticky dough. I mean, it's gonna be a little sticky, but not super sticky. I love standalone mixers because once it hits that ball stage and it actually balled up, we needed to mix it for 2 minutes. So I just go ahead and let the standalone mixer knead that for me. And now I'm gonna take this dough out, and I have my counter lightly floured, and I'm gonna keep flouring my hands, and I wanna go ahead and get my dough out of my bowl here onto the counter. And I'm just gonna put it on the counter just to give it a better shape than what it's currently in right now in the bowl. And you just use your spatula and work it from the back and slowly get it out onto this counter here. Now, the difference between using wild yeast, which we've harvested through the sourdough starter kit over the past couple days, is it doesn't act fast as the fast acting yeast, which you're probably used to when you have fast acting yeast in your house or using that package. Okay, that stuff works really fast. I'm not gonna knead it for a full 2 minutes. I'm just gonna knead it a little bit just to kind of give it shape, because we're making a pastry here, And so if I kept kneading it, I'm gonna actually start to form that gluten, excuse me. And that gluten will make this a tough dough, and we don't want tough because we want nice, fluffy cinnamon rolls. So there's my ball of dough. Now, if I was using the active dry yeast that I was talking about earlier, this would only need to rest for 10 minutes, but it needs to rest for 20 minutes now because I'm using real yeast. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of oil in a bowl. I'm gonna take my dough here, I'm gonna get it into my bowl, and I'm gonna get that covered in oil. Just move it around in here. And then I'm gonna cover this and I'm gonna let it sit for 20 minutes. And the dough has rested about 20 to 30 minutes. With fresh yeast, you're going to have to let it sit a little bit longer just because it is fresh. It's not that instant stuff. Now I have a lightly floured counter here. And we're gonna roll this out and we're gonna put cinnamon and sugar in it. So I like to mix it together. I have a 1/4 cup of butter. I have a 1/2 cup of sugar and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And I like to mix mine together. You don't have to mix it together. Some like to put the butter on top of the dough and then sprinkle it with cinnamon sugar. I like to mix it. Get some of the flour here and just sprinkle on top of your dough. We want to make this as rectangle as possible. It's going to make it easier for rolling it out and cutting it into your equal parts. And so you just give this a nice roll out. So like I was saying earlier, the bakers of the past would just take a piece of their dough. So I would take this and just cut that off, and this piece would be my sourdough starter. And I would just put it aside. But you have to remember, they would bake a lot more than we normally bake now. So they would use it all the time. And that's the baker's yeast, or their starter, is they would just cut off a piece. But the key with sourdough, or your sourdough starter, is patience and a lot of time. Because the yeast is wild and it's natural, it doesn't move as fast as the genetically modified fast rising active dry yeast. So you do have to give it time. So you can't say let it rise for an hour. You can't say let it sit and rest for 20 minutes. You actually have to let it sit and rest until it is double in size, and let the natural yeast do its thing. And let me try and get this a little bit more rectangle here. Even out these sides, it's more oval here now. That's all right. We can make this work. Okay, so now I'm gonna take my cinnamon and sugar. And if you are using discard and you're just replacing active dry yeast with discard, now the discard is a lot more moist, or there's a lot more liquid in it, so you're gonna have to add more flour. So the recipe I gave you called for 3.5 cups of flour, but we added a lot more in the mixing process because my discard was so wet. So you need to keep account of that. Now, if you don't want to add more flour, you're gonna have to use less discard, and you're gonna have to let it take longer to rise, because that's just the nature of it's a living thing. It's a living organism, and they're gonna do what they want to do at their time, not what you want them to do. So you have to be patient with them. And now we're gonna go ahead and take and just roll our dough to make our cinnamon rolls. And then we're gonna use the high-tech fancy cutting device. I'm gonna squish that up a little bit more, try to get it more squared. Now we're gonna cut this into 12 because I have my prepared pan here. It's already sprayed. I should get 4 rolls of 3. And this is the high-tech cutter. You probably can't see it. It's just a piece of string. And I'm just gonna take this underneath my cinnamon roll here. Maybe, let's get her in the center here. It's not wanting to cooperate with me. Normally you can just pull it in and just go at it all the way down. So I'm gonna cut that into halves. And I'm gonna cut the halves into halves. So now I should have 4 equal parts. And then out of those 4 equal parts, I should get 3 cinnamon rolls each. And then just place those into my prepared pan. The cinnamon rolls are still baking, but while they're baking, I'm gonna go ahead and make the frosting and then just set it aside until the cinnamon rolls are done baking and then they've had a chance to cool. I'm gonna go with 4 tablespoons of butter, which is a 1/4 cup or half a stick. So the other half of butter that we used in the actual cinnamon rolls recipe. We're gonna do 2 cups of confectionate sugar, or also known as powdered sugar. Just because powdered sugar is messy, I still like to spoon it into my measuring cup. And since this is frosting, I'm gonna adjust the powdered sugar content anyway to get the consistency that I want. So I'm not gonna be real fussy with how accurate my 1 cup measure is. So approximately 2 cups of the confectionate sugar. I'm gonna put in a teaspoon of vanilla. And then I'm gonna be slowly adding water to change the consistency of my mixture. Just kind of slowly start working it with the butter and the vanilla that's in there. And then I'll need to add water as I go. You can add milk if you want a richer frosting. But to make it so I do not have to refrigerate my cinnamon rolls, I'm not going to use a dairy product that needs to be refrigerated. Let me get some water. I'm just going to add my water a teaspoon at a time. You can go ahead and add it at a tablespoon at a time. You're just looking for the thickness that you like. Looks like a teaspoon was too little at a time. Still way too, a little bit more. And the frosting, as you can see, it's just fat and sugar. So you can't ruin it too much. If you add too much water, add more powdered sugar. You add too much powdered sugar, add more water. And then you slowly just mix it. I'm just using a fork. And once the cinnamon rolls come out of the oven, I'm gonna let them rest and cool for about another 5 to 10 minutes before I put the frosting on. And then they'll be ready to enjoy. Now this is kind of thicker than what I would like for cinnamon rolls, so I'll just go ahead and add a little bit more water. That's a good consistency for a cake or sugar cookies. But maybe for cinnamon rolls, have it a little bit more runnier. And there is our frosting, which I'll set aside and we'll wait for the cinnamon rolls to come out of the oven and to cool. All right, it's been 20 to 30 minutes. Here's my cinnamon rolls. We'll let those rest and then we'll get them iced. After they baked for 20 minutes, I went ahead and turned them over. So I put my cutting board on top of my pan and I flipped it and let them come out of the pan. And then I turned them over again, so now they're all upright, and I went ahead and divided them. I let them cool for about 5 minutes. If you frost them right out of the oven, the frosting is just gonna run right off. So I let them cool, I separated them a bit. Gonna just go ahead and put some frosting on each one of these. Look at these nice Arizona sourdough cinnamon rolls made from the yeast, the sourdough starter that we cultivated right here in my own kitchen. And they look scrumptious. And there we are, folks. Enjoy.